I didn't say a word during her rant, just slid the county survey map across the table and watched her face go white. See, Vivian Kensington thought she'd won when her HOA built that 8-foot razor wire fence, blocking the same road my family had used for 40 years. She'd just finished threatening me with jail time for trespassing on what she called their property. The arrogance was breathtaking. This woman had moved here 2 years ago and was now lecturing a third-generation rancher about property law. What she didn't realize was that her precious fence was sitting 12 feet inside my property line, and I had the paperwork to prove it. By the time I finished with her fake HOA empire, she'd be paying me $5 every time she wanted access to her own subdivision. What would you do if your neighbors literally fenced you out of your own property? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because this story of how one HOA Karen picked the wrong cowboy is just getting started. Let me tell you how this whole mess started. My name's Garrett Thompson, and this 80-acre spread has been in my family since 1960. My grandfather bought it when cattle were still king and suburbs were just a city planner's fever dream. Back then, this road was nothing but a dirt track cutting through pasture land as far as you could see. 3 years ago, I lost my wife Sarah to cancer. She was the smart one, had her paralegal degree, handled all our legal paperwork. The smell of her coffee still lingers in the kitchen sometimes, mixing with the scent of leather and hay that defines ranch life. Without her, I've been running this operation mostly solo, just me and about 60 head of Angus cattle. Then came the invasion. In 2019, some hotshot developer from Dallas decided our quiet corner of Texas was perfect for luxury suburban living. Willowbrook Estates, they called it, promised to enhance the rural character while cramming 200 cookie-cutter houses around my property. The developer swore they'd honor our road easement. We had a handshake agreement going back to my grandfather's time, when a man's word actually meant something. Everything was peaceful until she arrived. Meet Vivian Kensington. 48 years old, drives a white BMW that stays cleaner than most people's dinner plates. Real estate background, always dressed like she's heading to close a $1 million deal. The kind of woman who uses summer as a verb and thinks manual labor is something you hire immigrants to do. Our first encounter? She showed up at my gate wearing stilettos, on gravel, complaining about the offensive agricultural odors affecting her property values. Said the sight of my tractor was inconsistent with modern neighborhood standards. I politely explained that my cattle had been here since before she was born. The sound of her heels clicking angrily on my driveway told me she didn't appreciate the history lesson. 6 months ago, Vivian campaigned for HOA president on a platform of elevating community standards. Translation: get rid of the cowboy. Her victory speech mentioned removing incompatible land uses 3 times. I should have paid attention. It started with harassment disguised as neighborly concern, certified letters demanding I stop using their road immediately, threats of $1,000 daily fines, legal action if I didn't comply with community standards. And Sarah used to handle all our correspondence, and I remembered her telling me once, "Always keep bullies' threats in writing, honey. They'll hang themselves with their own words." So I ignored Vivian's fancy letterhead and kept doing what my family had done for 60 years. Big mistake. Vivian organized emergency community meetings about the health hazards of living near livestock, spread completely fabricated stories about cattle diseases and groundwater contamination. Pure fiction, but effective. Worried parents started avoiding eye contact at the hardware store. Property values became the neighborhood obsession. The taste of my morning coffee turned bitter as I watched my neighbors turn against me. She convinced the HOA board that my ranch posed an immediate security threat requiring protective barriers. The vote was unanimous, 7 suburban soccer moms against 1 absent rancher who didn't even know there was a meeting. Last Monday night, while I was sleeping off a long day of fence repair, Vivian struck. Hired a contractor to install that 8-foot prison fence, complete with razor wire, blocking my only road access. When I called her Tuesday morning, she acted shocked that I was trespassing on private HOA property. Here's what city folks don't understand about ranch life. Cattle don't take sick days. They need daily care, regular vet visits, feed deliveries twice a week. Without road access, I'm looking at helicopter drops for everything. A ton of hay that normally costs $60 to deliver? Try $600 by air. But this isn't about money. This is about legacy, about honoring my grandfather's sweat and my wife's memory. Standing at that fence, listening to my cattle calling from the pasture, I could almost hear Sarah's voice. "Don't let bullies win, Garrett. Fight smart, not hard." The morning breeze carried the smell of fresh-cut cedar fence posts and the faint diesel fumes from Vivian's midnight construction project. Every rancher knows that when someone declares war on your land, you'd better be ready to defend it. The next morning brought the sound of gravel crunching in my driveway and Sheriff Rex Hoffman climbing out of his patrol car with legal papers that would change everything. Rex and I went to high school together, so the look on his face told me this wasn't a social call. "Sorry, Garrett," he said, avoiding eye contact like a man delivering bad news at a funeral. "Got a restraining order here saying you cut through private property yesterday." I nearly laughed, if it wasn't so damn insulting. "Rex, that's the same road we used to ride our bikes on to get to the fishing hole." But the law doesn't care about childhood memories, and Vivian had played this perfectly by claiming my fence cutting was trespassing on HOA property. The restraining order gave her exactly what she wanted: exclusive road use while I fought an uphill legal battle with a court date 6 weeks out. My lawyer Jim Patterson delivered that cheerful news over coffee, explaining that Judge Morrison was backlogged with property disputes, and my cattle couldn't wait that long for justice. "There's got to be something we can do," I said, tasting the copper pennies of injustice mixed with my morning brew. Jim scratched his gray beard thoughtfully and suggested challenging the property boundaries, asking when I'd last had a survey done. That's when I remembered something Sarah used to say during our evening porch talks. When someone's lying about property lines, the truth is usually buried in some courthouse basement. She'd learned that handling boundary disputes for farmers getting squeezed by developers during her paralegal days, and her words had never felt more relevant. I hired Earl, the best surveyor in the county, a crusty old-timer who'd been mapping Texas land since before GPS existed, and whose chain-smoking habit mixed with surveyor's chalk to create its own unique professional atmosphere. After 3 days of careful measurements, Earl pointed at his transit scope with the satisfaction of a man who'd found buried treasure. "Son, that fence ain't where they think it is." The survey revealed what Vivian didn't know. My grandfather's original 1960 deed showed a 20-foot easement in perpetuity for ranch access. But more importantly, the HOA's property line was actually 15 feet from where they'd built their precious fence. Their fancy barrier was sitting squarely on my land, making them the trespassers. But the real bombshell came when I dug deeper into courthouse records, remembering Sarah's advice about professional surveys being essential before any boundary dispute because assumption is the mother of all legal disasters. My grandfather hadn't just made a handshake deal. He'd filed that easement officially with the county back in 1967, the documents yellow with age and forgotten in some basement filing cabinet until I dragged them into the light. "This changes everything," Jim said, studying the paperwork with the kind of smile lawyers get when they smell victory. "You've got legal standing to sue for damages now since that fence is an illegal obstruction of a recorded easement." And the irony was beautiful. Vivian's power play had just handed me the legal ammunition I needed to blow her case apart. But she wasn't finished escalating, launching a harassment campaign that would have impressed a military strategist. Suddenly, I was getting anonymous noise complaints about my roosters crowing at dawn, as if roosters haven't been doing that since the beginning of time, followed by unannounced county inspectors looking for violations that didn't exist on any other ranch in Texas. The smell of bureaucratic harassment has its own particular stench, like paperwork mixed with petty authority, and Vivian was spreading it thick. She organized safety patrols to monitor my property with binoculars, claiming they were watching for suspicious activity, while calling the health department about unsanitary conditions that forced me to waste 2 days proving my livestock operation met every regulation on the books. Each complaint cost me time and money I didn't have. But every false report also created a paper trail of harassment that Jim carefully documented, explaining that frivolous complaints show a pattern of bad faith that judges hate seeing. The breaking point came when I found Vivian's people trespassing on my actual property, claiming to measure environmental impact zones, and I ordered them off my land after snapping photos of their license plates and faces for evidence. That evening, sitting on the porch where Sarah and I used to plan our days, I made a decision while listening to cattle lowing in the distance and wind whistling through mesquite trees. The taste of defeat was something I'd never acquired, and this woman thought she could run roughshod over 40 years of history, over my family's legacy, over my wife's memory. She'd picked the wrong fight with the wrong rancher, and I swear I could hear Sarah whispering on the evening breeze, "Now you're thinking like a lawyer, cowboy." Time to turn the tables. Vivian's next move came straight out of the modern warfare playbook. She took the fight to social media and local news because nothing says reasonable neighbor like turning a property dispute into a publicity circus. Channel 7's morning show featured her standing in front of my fence, wearing a perfectly pressed blazer and speaking in that concerned citizen voice that politicians practice in mirrors. "We're dealing with a dangerous individual who's threatened our community's safety," she told the camera, managing to look both brave and vulnerable while standing behind 8 feet of chain link and razor wire. The reporter ate it up like Sunday dinner, asking leading questions about my aggressive behavior and threats to neighborhood children, none of which had actually happened but sounded terrifying when delivered with Vivian's practiced sincerity. She organized a petition to have my property condemned as a public nuisance, gathering signatures from neighbors who'd never set foot on my land but were convinced I was running some kind of livestock apocalypse. The hashtag Willowbrook Safety hashtag started trending locally, complete with photos of my cattle looking supposedly menacing while doing nothing more dangerous than eating grass and minding their own business. Vivian even managed to pressure County Commissioner Bradley Walsh into promising a full investigation of my ranching operation, despite the fact that I'd passed every inspection for 40 years running. The smell of political manipulation mixed with fear-mongering created an atmosphere thick enough to cut with a knife, and I was breathing it every time I stepped outside my house. But while Vivian was busy playing media darling, I was doing something she hadn't counted on: actual research. Digging through the HOA's incorporation papers revealed something fascinating that Sarah would have spotted in 5 minutes with her paralegal training. Vivian had never properly filed the required documents with the state. The Willowbrook Estates HOA didn't legally exist as an entity, making all their official actions about as legally binding as a grocery list. Every fine they'd threatened, every regulation they'd cited, every legal action they'd taken was built on a foundation of bureaucratic quicksand. I remembered Sarah explaining to frustrated clients that many HOAs operate without proper legal standing, thinking that neighborhood consensus equals legal authority, but the law doesn't work that way. Jim Patterson's reaction to this discovery was worth the price of admission. He actually started laughing while reading the documents, explaining that everything the fake HOA had done was legally void since they had no standing to enforce anything. "It's like being arrested by someone wearing a fake police badge," he said, practically giddy with the legal implications. "They can threaten all they want, but they can't actually do anything." This meant their restraining order, their property claims, their fines and fees. All of it was elaborate theater performed by people who thought official-looking letterhead made them legitimate. Meanwhile, I started playing rope-a-dope, letting the media interview me as the reasonable neighbor who just wanted to ranch in peace while documenting every illegal action by Vivian's pretend organization. I gathered testimony from other residents who'd been bullied by her tactics, including Daphne Rodriguez, a retired teacher who'd been fined $300 for painting her mailbox the wrong shade of blue according to regulations that didn't legally exist. The community was splitting along predictable lines. Newer residents sided with Vivian's suburban vision, while longtime locals remembered my family's contributions to the area, though many were afraid to speak publicly for fear of becoming her next target. The mini twist came when I discovered Vivian's real motivation through some detective work that would have made Sarah proud. She wasn't just trying to eliminate rural eyesores. She was secretly working with the original developer to buy my land for subdivision into 40 luxury lots, complete with preliminary approval from the Planning Commission that she'd somehow fast-tracked through her real estate connections. Her HOA presidency wasn't about community standards. It was an elaborate land grab disguised as neighborhood improvement, with her standing to make millions if she could force me to sell. The manila envelope containing real estate contracts and profit projections had been left carelessly in her BMW while she conducted one of her safety patrols, and the taste of bitter irony filled my mouth as I photographed every page through her car window. Vivian's overreach continued when she tried to have me arrested for threatening behavior during a chance encounter at the hardware store, where I'd politely asked her to stop trespassing on my property. Sheriff Rex saw through her performance immediately, but she demanded a different officer investigate, creating a paper trail of false accusations that would come back to haunt her. The sound of her voice getting higher and more shrill each time she lied became as recognizable as a train whistle, and I started recording our conversations whenever possible. By the time she realized I was building a case for harassment and property damage, she was already drowning in her own documentation of illegal behavior, and I could almost hear Sarah laughing at the beautiful irony of it all. Vivian's desperation reached new heights when she started playing the government card, using her real estate connections to weaponize bureaucracy against me in ways that would have impressed a Soviet commissar. A county inspector named Marcus Webb showed up unannounced on a Tuesday morning, clipboard in hand and attitude on full display, claiming he'd received multiple complaints about my operation that required immediate investigation. The smell of his cheap cologne mixed with morning coffee created an atmosphere of artificial authority as he strutted around my property looking for violations that somehow didn't exist on any other ranch in Texas. Webb found infractions that were pure invention. My water troughs were supposedly too close to the property line, my hay storage didn't meet modern safety standards, and my cattle gate allegedly violated noise ordinances that had never been enforced in rural areas. The timing wasn't coincidental since Vivian had been making phone calls to every county office she could find, threatening to expose corruption and negligence if they didn't take action against the dangerous rancher in her neighborhood. She was using political pressure to fast-track a condemnation process that normally took years, and Commissioner Walsh was sweating bullets about his upcoming re-election campaign every time she mentioned her media connections. But while Vivian was busy pulling strings, I was discovering something that would change the entire game. My surveyor Earl had made an observation that Sarah's legal mind would have immediately recognized as pure gold. The gate mechanism that Vivian's HOA claimed as their property was sitting entirely on my land, 12 feet inside my actual property line according to the official survey. This revelation hit me like lightning during my morning coffee, and I remembered Sarah explaining to clients that controlling the access point means controlling the power in any property dispute. If Vivian wanted to use my gate to access their subdivision, they could pay for the privilege like any other commercial enterprise using private property for business purposes. I spent the next 3 days researching private road toll laws, discovering legal precedent in Texas that allows property owners to charge reasonable access fees when their land is used for transportation by others. The legal takeaway Sarah had drilled into me was simple: know your property rights because nobody else will protect them for you. Vivian's panic response when she learned about the survey results was immediate and predictable. She tried to move the fence back overnight using the same contractor who'd built it, probably thinking she could erase her mistake before anyone noticed. But I'd installed security cameras after her first trespassing incident, and every hammer blow was documented in high-definition video that would make beautiful evidence in court. The sound of metal posts being yanked out of concrete at 2 in the morning mixed with whispered arguments between workers who clearly knew they were committing property destruction. And by dawn, I had enough footage to file criminal charges for vandalism and trespassing. The community pressure was building like steam in a boiler as media attention grew beyond local news into regional coverage, with my David versus Goliath story resonating among rural viewers who'd faced similar HOA bullying tactics. Social media split along predictable urban versus rural lines, but the property values in Willowbrook Estates started dropping as potential buyers researched the legal disputes and discovered they'd be moving into a war zone. Other residents began demanding accountability from their HOA board, questioning where their fees were going and why they were facing potential lawsuits over Vivian's aggressive tactics that nobody had actually voted to support. The personal cost was mounting daily as veterinary emergencies forced expensive helicopter visits that tripled my operating expenses, while feed deliveries required costly workarounds that stressed my cattle and damaged my profit margins. The taste of antacid tablets became as familiar as morning coffee during sleepless nights when I calculated how long I could sustain this financial hemorrhaging before losing everything my grandfather had built. But each dawn brought renewed determination as I remembered Sarah's final words about not letting bullies win. And the feel of her worn leather gloves in my workshop reminded me that some fights are worth the cost regardless of the outcome. Vivian's financial troubles emerged when I hired a private investigator to research her background, discovering she was facing foreclosure on her own property and desperately needed the developer kickback to avoid bankruptcy. The HOA fund showed mysterious consulting payments to companies that existed only on paper, suggesting she'd been embezzling money to make her mortgage payments while planning to disappear with millions from my forced land sale. Her desperation was making her increasingly dangerous and unpredictable, but it also meant she was running out of options and time. That evening, while reading through Sarah's old law books by lamplight, I found exactly what I'd been looking for: an obscure property law about adverse possession that would let me turn Vivian's fence blockade into legal ammunition. The irony was perfect. She'd given me the weapon to destroy her, and I could almost hear Sarah whispering in the wind through the mesquite trees. "Now you're ready to fight back, cowboy." Everything changed the night I found Sarah's hidden research in the old cedar chest at the foot of our bed. Documents I'd never seen during 40 years of marriage that would turn this entire fight on its head. Sarah had been more than just my paralegal wife. She'd been quietly investigating property rights issues in our area for years, documenting cases where developers used HOA manipulation to force out inconvenient landowners. The smell of old paper mixed with her fading perfume brought tears to my eyes as I discovered her detailed notes about the Willowbrook development, including a clause in the original developer agreement that Vivian either didn't know about or was desperately hoping I'd never find. The clause was buried in Section 47 of the Municipal Development Contract, written in the kind of legal language that makes normal people's eyes glaze over, but Sarah had highlighted it in yellow and written "perpetual access guaranteed" in her careful handwriting. The developer was legally required to maintain road access in perpetuity for all pre-existing properties, meaning my ranch access couldn't be blocked under any circumstances without violating the original municipal agreement that created the subdivision. Sarah had been building a case to protect our property rights long before she got sick, and her legal mind had spotted the smoking gun that would end Vivian's land grab permanently. But the real bombshell was hidden in Sarah's investigation of the HOA's finances, revealing that the developer had never paid the required infrastructure bonds to the county, a debt of $2.3 million that the HOA was legally responsible for collecting. The takeaway Sarah had learned from similar cases was simple: always research who's really responsible for HOA debts, because assumption can bankrupt entire neighborhoods. Vivian's fake organization was not only illegally formed, but it was sitting on top of a financial time bomb that could destroy every property owner in Willowbrook Estates. This discovery shifted the entire power dynamic because the county needed my cooperation to collect that debt, giving me leverage that Vivian never saw coming. Her authority was built on quicksand, and every legal action she'd taken was about to collapse under the weight of financial reality. The gate blockade that was supposed to force me into submission had actually given me the perfect bargaining position to negotiate from strength rather than desperation. But Sarah's research revealed an even more devastating truth about Vivian's vulnerability. She'd been embezzling HOA funds through fake consulting contracts to her own company, using the money to make mortgage payments while planning to disappear with millions from forcing my land sale. The manila envelope contained bank records, forged invoices, and email communications that showed a pattern of financial fraud spanning 18 months, enough evidence to send her to prison for years while bankrupting every homeowner who'd trusted her with their community fees. The epiphany hit me like a lightning bolt as I realized Sarah had handed me the perfect strategy. Since the gate sat on my property according to the official survey, I could charge access fees under Texas private road toll laws, forcing the HOA to either negotiate in good faith or face financial ruin. Legal precedent supported property owners charging reasonable rates for transportation access across their land, and I could set those rates high enough to recover my damages while maintaining the moral high ground. Daphne Rodriguez knocked on my door the next morning with inside information that confirmed Sarah's research. Vivian had been bullying neighbors with illegal fines and fake regulations for months, but nobody had the legal knowledge to fight back effectively. As a former county clerk, Daphne knew every loophole in the system and offered to help document Vivian's pattern of harassment across the neighborhood. The emotional turning point came when I realized Sarah hadn't just prepared me for this fight. She'd given me everything I needed to win it honorably while protecting other property owners from future abuse. The taste of victory coffee that morning carried the sweetness of justice finally within reach. The war room setup happened in my kitchen, where Sarah's old legal books spread across the oak table she'd inherited from her grandmother, mixing the smell of aged paper with fresh coffee as I assembled the team that would take down Vivian's empire of lies. Jim Patterson arrived first, followed by Daphne Rodriguez with her insider knowledge of county procedures, then Sheriff Rex offering unofficial law enforcement insight during his off-duty hours, and finally Judge Harold Mason, retired but still sharp as a tack, who volunteered his strategic expertise after hearing about Vivian's abusive legal process. The sound of pages turning and pencils scratching on legal pads filled the room as we built a case that would have made Sarah proud, each piece of evidence fitting together like a perfectly crafted puzzle. The toll road economics became our centerpiece strategy after researching Texas property law and discovering that private landowners can absolutely charge for access across their property, with market rates determined by factors including maintenance costs, property damage, and fair compensation for commercial use. I calculated $5 per day for individual vehicles and $500 per month for unlimited access, rates that were reasonable by legal standards but expensive enough to force negotiation while covering my helicopter feed delivery costs and property damage from Vivian's harassment campaign. The financial strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Either they paid fair market value for using my land, or they found another way to access their subdivision. But the days of free access through intimidation were permanently over. Technical preparations became crucial as Earl helped me install high-resolution security cameras with night vision capabilities, documenting every approach to the gate while creating a digital archive of all legal documents that could be accessed remotely if Vivian tried more sabotage. We hired a professional surveyor to place permanent boundary markers that couldn't be moved or disputed, establishing a paper trail for every interaction that would hold up in federal court if necessary. The taste of methodical preparation mixed with morning coffee as I learned that documentation defeats desperation every time, and Vivian's panic-driven decisions were creating evidence faster than I could catalog it. Community building became essential as I connected with other property owners facing HOA abuse throughout the county, organizing informal meetings at Murphy's Diner, where longtime locals shared stories of bureaucratic bullying that followed identical patterns. We discovered that Vivian's tactics weren't original. She'd used the same playbook in 2 previous communities before moving to Willowbrook, leaving behind bankrupt HOAs and angry homeowners who wished they'd fought back sooner. The network of witnesses and supporters grew daily as people realized they weren't alone in facing these predatory practices, and the smell of bacon and solidarity filled the diner during our breakfast strategy sessions. Media strategy required controlling the narrative by providing exclusive access to Channel 7's investigative reporter, who was eager to expose HOA corruption after receiving tips about Vivian's embezzlement and illegal tactics. I demonstrated how the road blockade affected emergency services by having the fire chief explain that ambulance response times to my property had tripled, potentially costing lives during medical emergencies that couldn't wait for helicopter transport. The economic impact extended beyond my ranch as local businesses lost revenue from blocked delivery routes, and positioning this as property rights versus HOA overreach resonated with rural voters who understood the stakes. The toll booth construction became a masterpiece of functional humor, as I built a professional-looking station using salvaged materials and electronic payment systems that could process credit cards and maintain transaction records for tax purposes. Official signage read, "Private road, toll required," with smaller text explaining Complaints Department, take a number, adding levity to serious legal proceedings while maintaining the moral high ground. The sound of power tools mixing with laughter from neighbors who stopped to watch progress reminded everyone that sometimes the best response to bullying is creative resistance that exposes the absurdity of the entire situation. Psychological warfare preparation involved anticipating Vivian's desperate responses by creating backup plans for every scenario, from escalation to violence and sabotage to attempts at bribery and political manipulation. I maintained a calm, reasonable public demeanor while documenting her increasingly erratic behavior, letting her destroy her own credibility through overreach and panic-driven decisions that alienated potential supporters. The legal nugget Sarah had taught me proved invaluable. Document everything, stay calm, and know your rights, because bullies rely on ignorance and fear to maintain control. Financial education for the audience became part of our strategy as we explained how to research property easements through county records, why professional surveys matter before buying property, and how to challenge illegal HOA actions through proper legal channels. The key takeaway was always the same. Property rights are fundamental American freedoms that require active defense against those who would abuse authority for personal gain. The emotional preparation transformed me from a grieving widower being pushed around into a strategic fighter honoring Sarah's memory by protecting other property owners from future abuse. The feel of her legal books in my hands and the taste of her coffee recipe gave me strength during planning sessions, and I realized she'd been preparing me for this leadership role long before either of us knew it would be necessary. Vivian's midnight sabotage operation began at 2:15 in the morning according to my security cameras, capturing her in high-definition glory as she approached my toll booth with a sledgehammer like some deranged suburban Viking bent on property destruction. The sound of her BMW's engine cutting off mixed with whispered curses as she struggled to swing the heavy tool in her designer workout clothes, clearly not understanding that destroying someone else's property on camera creates evidence that prosecutors love more than Christmas morning. She managed to dent the metal housing and shatter the payment screen before her stamina gave out, but not before cutting the power lines to what she thought were my security cameras, apparently unaware that backup battery systems exist for people who plan ahead for criminal behavior. The spray painting came next as she grabbed a can of red paint from her car and wrote "fraud" across the side of my truck in letters that dripped like blood. The smell of fresh aerosol mixing with her panic sweat as she realized she was probably being recorded despite cutting the main power. My backup battery-powered cameras captured every frame in crystal clarity, including her license plate, her face, and the moment she discovered that vandalizing someone's vehicle while trespassing on their property carries serious criminal penalties, regardless of how justified you think your cause might be. The taste of sweet vindication filled my mouth as I watched her stumble back to her BMW, leaving behind enough evidence to convict her in any court in America. Sheriff Rex arrived within an hour of my call, his patrol car lights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness as he surveyed the damage with the weary expression of a man who'd seen too much stupidity in one lifetime. "Well, Garrett, looks like you got yourself a clear-cut case of criminal mischief and trespassing," he said, photographing the evidence while I provided him with USB drives containing the complete security footage. Vivian was charged with 3 misdemeanors that morning, her mugshot showing the kind of disheveled desperation that happens when entitled people discover actions have consequences, and several HOA board members resigned immediately after realizing their liability for supporting her illegal tactics. But I took the high road despite having enough evidence to destroy her completely, offering an alternative that demonstrated the kind of grace Sarah would have admired while maintaining strategic advantage. Instead of pressing charges, I demanded a public apology and full restitution for damages, giving Vivian a chance to negotiate settlement before her criminal trial date, which kept me in the sympathetic position with community members who were getting tired of the constant conflict. The gesture showed that I was reasonable and forgiving while she was destructive and criminal, a contrast that played perfectly in local media coverage of the escalating property dispute. Vivian's response was predictably tone-deaf as she hired a Dallas PR firm to spin the story, claiming harassment and discrimination while playing the victim card with the kind of professional desperation that costs $1,000 per day. Her safety rally against the dangerous rancher was scheduled for the community center, complete with professionally printed signs and a social media campaign that portrayed my cattle as somehow threatening to neighborhood children who had never actually been threatened by anything more dangerous than my prize bull Ferdinand eating grass. The smell of desperation mixed with expensive public relations consulting filled the air as she doubled down on lies that were becoming increasingly transparent to anyone paying attention. The community backlash was swift and merciless as longtime residents publicly defended my family's 40-year contribution to the area, sharing stories about my grandfather's generosity during hard times and my own reputation for helping neighbors during emergencies. Other HOA victims came forward with their own horror stories about Vivian's illegal fines and fake regulations, creating a chorus of testimony that painted her as a serial bully who'd been terrorizing the neighborhood for months while enriching herself through fraudulent consulting contracts. Local businesses began boycotting her real estate company after customers complained about her tactics, and property values in Willowbrook Estates continued dropping as potential buyers discovered they'd be moving into a legal war zone. The financial pressure mounted daily as my toll booth generated $3,000 in its first month, money that residents couldn't afford to pay indefinitely while their property values plummeted and legal costs mounted from fighting my legitimate claims. Some families moved out rather than continue paying daily fees for road access, creating a cascade of foreclosures that threatened the entire subdivision's economic stability. While Vivian's developer deal fell through when her partner realized the legal complications made the project too risky for investment. Her attempted bribery came during a recorded phone conversation where she offered me $100,000 to drop the toll and relocate, money that obviously came from embezzled HOA funds since her own real estate business was circling the financial drain. The mini-twist arrived when federal investigators became interested in the HOA's financial irregularities after I forwarded evidence of Vivian's embezzlement to the appropriate authorities, triggering investigations by the IRS for tax fraud, the Postal Service for mail fraud, and the county DA for criminal charges that could send her to prison for years. Her house of cards was collapsing faster than she could rebuild it, and the sound of her increasingly shrill voice during public appearances told everyone that panic had replaced confidence in her rapidly shrinking world of influence and control. Vivian's scorched earth strategy launched with the kind of desperate fury that happens when cornered animals realize they're about to lose everything: hiring private security guards to patrol the subdivision in black SUVs that looked more like an occupying army than neighborhood protection. The smell of paranoia mixed with expensive surveillance equipment as uniformed men with earpieces walked property lines taking photographs and notes, creating an atmosphere of intimidation that backfired spectacularly when residents complained about feeling like prisoners in their own homes. Her next move crossed every line of human decency when she attempted to have me committed for mental evaluation, filing papers claiming I posed a danger to myself and others based on fabricated incidents that existed only in her increasingly unhinged imagination. The cattle disease rumors she spread to destroy my business were pure biological fiction designed to trigger federal agriculture inspections that would shut down my operation permanently. But her lies about groundwater contamination and livestock illness fell apart when veterinary records proved my herd was healthier than most cattle in Texas. She contacted the EPA with false environmental claims about runoff and soil contamination, forcing me to spend thousands on independent testing that confirmed what every rancher in the county already knew. My land management practices exceeded all regulatory standards and had been protecting local watersheds for decades. The taste of manufactured crisis filled the air as government inspectors arrived weekly to investigate complaints that had no basis in reality. Each false report creating more documentation of Vivian's pattern of harassment and abuse of federal resources. But while Vivian was busy burning bridges and destroying her credibility through increasingly outrageous lies, I was coordinating with the county attorney's office to arrange something special for the upcoming public meeting she'd demanded to expel me from road access permanently. Federal investigators had been quietly building cases against her for months, and they were eager to attend as concerned citizens, interested in HOA governance and financial transparency, though Vivian didn't know her audience would include IRS agents and postal inspectors who'd been tracking her embezzlement scheme across state lines. The comprehensive presentation of evidence I'd prepared included financial records, security footage, recorded conversations, and witness testimony that would destroy her credibility in front of the entire community she'd been manipulating through fear and lies. Community tension peaked as the neighborhood divided into Team Vivian versus Team Garrett factions, with yard signs and heated arguments at school board meetings creating the kind of Civil War atmosphere that real estate agents have nightmares about when property sales stall throughout an entire subdivision. Local media coverage had gone national as the David versus Goliath story resonated with rural viewers across America who'd faced similar HOA bullying tactics. But the constant conflict was exhausting residents who just wanted to live peacefully without legal drama consuming their daily lives. The sound of arguments echoing through the subdivision at all hours created stress that affected children and elderly residents most, turning what should have been a quiet family neighborhood into a battleground where neighbors avoided eye contact and property values continued their downward spiral. Vivian's overconfidence reached dangerous levels as she convinced herself that victory was within reach, calling an emergency HOA meeting to witness her final solution to the rancher problem, while promising residents their property values would recover once I was eliminated from the equation. She brought her lawyer and invited media to document her triumph, planning to have me arrested at the public meeting for violations that existed only in her imagination, but her hubris was about to collide with reality in ways she never anticipated. The private security guards, fake legal documents, and manufactured evidence she'd assembled would crumble under scrutiny from actual law enforcement officials who understood the difference between legitimate authority and elaborate theater performed by someone wearing fake legal credentials. Hidden allies emerged from unexpected places as 3 HOA board members secretly provided inside information about Vivian's financial manipulation and illegal tactics, while County Commissioner Walsh offered behind-the-scenes intelligence about her attempts to bribe officials and manipulate government inspections. Local news anchor Jennifer Martinez had been investigating Vivian's background independently, discovering she'd used identical tactics in 2 previous communities before fleeing ahead of criminal charges, leaving behind bankrupt HOAs and angry homeowners who wished they'd fought back sooner. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to look. Vivian was a serial predator who targeted rural properties for forced sales, using HOA manipulation as cover for elaborate real estate fraud schemes that had netted her millions over the years. The trap was perfectly set as the community center meeting approached, with federal investigators positioned as ordinary citizens, all evidence documented and ready for presentation, and Vivian walking blindly toward public exposure that would end her criminal career permanently. The personal stakes couldn't have been higher as I prepared for this final confrontation, visiting Sarah's grave one last time to promise that this fight would end honorably and serve as protection for other property owners facing similar abuse. The feel of weathered granite under my palm and the sound of wind through mesquite trees reminded me that some battles are worth fighting regardless of personal cost, because the alternative is letting bullies destroy everything decent people have built through honest work and sacrifice. The taste of approaching victory mixed with morning coffee as I realized Sarah had been preparing me for this leadership role long before either of us knew it would be necessary, and her legal mind was about to deliver justice from beyond the grave. The community center was packed beyond fire code capacity that evening, with overflow crowds spilling onto the parking lot where local news trucks created a carnival atmosphere of flashing lights and satellite dishes reaching toward storm clouds gathering overhead. The smell of nervous sweat mixed with coffee from the concession stand as residents filed in wearing their chosen team colors, Vivian's supporters in polo shirts and khakis, my allies in jeans and work boots, creating visible battle lines that split families and longtime friendships down the middle. Sheriff Rex positioned himself near the front doors with backup deputies, knowing this confrontation could turn ugly fast, while federal investigators took seats in the back row wearing civilian clothes and patient expressions that suggested they'd been waiting months for this exact moment. Vivian commanded the front table like a general preparing for battle, her confidence radiating through expensive clothing and professionally styled hair that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. Flanked by her Dallas lawyer and surrounded by manufactured evidence designed to destroy my reputation permanently. She opened with a PowerPoint presentation that would have impressed corporate executives, complete with slides showing illegal toll collection, property value destruction, and community safety threats that painted me as a dangerous criminal who needed immediate removal from civilized society. The sound of her voice carried artificial authority as she demanded the HOA board vote to ban me from road access permanently, threatening legal action against anyone who supported my reign of terror against innocent suburban families. But confidence turned to confusion when I stood up with my manila folder of evidence, the room falling silent as I approached the microphone with the kind of calm that comes from knowing truth trumps theater every single time. "Before you vote on anything," I said, my voice carrying across the packed room without need for amplification, "there's something you folks should know about your HOA and the woman who's been running it." The taste of sweet justice filled my mouth as I opened that folder and began presenting survey documents showing their fence sitting squarely on my property, followed by incorporation papers proving the Willowbrook HOA had never legally existed as an entity capable of enforcing anything more binding than a neighborhood suggestion box. The evidence cascade was beautiful to watch as truth bombs exploded across the room in rapid succession. Embezzlement records displayed on the projector showing fake consulting contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Security footage of Vivian's midnight vandalism played on the large screen for everyone to witness. Audio recordings of her bribery attempts broadcast through speakers that carried her desperate voice to every corner of the building. And real estate contracts revealing her secret partnership with developers planning to subdivide my ranch into luxury lots worth millions. Each revelation hit the crowd like physical blows, gasps and shocked murmurs building into angry shouting as residents realized they'd been manipulated by a criminal who'd been stealing their money while planning to get rich from destroying their neighbor. Vivian's meltdown was spectacular as she screamed about conspiracies and frame jobs while attempting to grab the microphone from my hands, her perfectly composed facade cracking like cheap paint under pressure, until Sheriff Rex had to physically restrain her before she could assault me in front of 300 witnesses. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed through sudden silence as federal agents stepped forward to identify themselves, serving warrants for HOA financial records while placing Vivian under arrest for mail fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy charges that would send her to federal prison for years. Her lawyer abandoned her faster than rats leaving a sinking ship, gathering his briefcase and heading for the exit while she continued screaming about innocence that nobody believed anymore. Community healing began immediately as the HOA board voted unanimously to dissolve their illegal organization, with residents publicly apologizing for being misled by someone who'd weaponized their legitimate concerns about property values against their own neighbor. The fence removal was scheduled for the next morning using county equipment, restoring road access that should never have been blocked in the first place, while discussion turned to forming a voluntary neighborhood association focused on community building rather than authoritarian control. The smell of relief mixed with shame filled the room as people realized they'd been accomplices in bullying someone whose family had contributed to their community for decades. But forgiveness came easier than expected, when offered with genuine grace. My moment of triumph came not from Vivian's destruction, but from the opportunity to transform conflict into positive change, announcing the Sarah Memorial Scholarship Fund for paralegal training that would help other rural women protect their property rights through education rather than expensive litigation. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense, I told the packed room. But property rights matter less than community spirit, and Sarah would be proud that we did this the right way. The taste of victory was sweet but not bitter, seasoned with hope for better relationships among neighbors who'd learned hard lessons about the difference between legitimate authority and elaborate fraud designed to enrich criminals at everyone else's expense. The reporter's final question about my strategy received the answer Sarah would have approved. Bullies count on good people staying quiet, but sometimes you have to fight to protect what's right, and the best revenge is always living well. Justice moved swiftly once the federal machinery kicked into gear, with Vivian sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, plus full restitution to every homeowner she'd defrauded through her elaborate HOA embezzlement scheme. The taste of vindication was sweeter than Sarah's honey from our old beehives, as I watched the courthouse steps empty after her sentencing, knowing that sometimes the legal system actually works when presented with overwhelming evidence of criminal behavior. The HOA dissolved permanently within 30 days. Freeing residents from illegal deed restrictions and fake regulations that had never been properly filed with any legitimate authority, while my legal fees were paid from recovered funds that investigators traced through multiple bank accounts Vivian had used to hide her stolen money. The toll booth became a neighborhood joke and popular photo spot where visitors stopped to commemorate the victory of property rights over bureaucratic bullying, though I discontinued charging fees once normal road access was restored and relationships with neighbors began healing from months of manufactured conflict. Property values recovered quickly and exceeded previous highs as potential buyers discovered they'd be moving into a community that had successfully fought off predatory HOA tactics, creating a model for voluntary cooperation that other neighborhoods began studying and implementing. The annual Garrett Day barbecue started the following summer, bringing together families who'd been divided by Vivian's manipulation while celebrating the kind of community spirit that makes rural Texas special. Personal healing came gradually as grief transformed into purposeful action, honoring Sarah's memory through tangible help for other property owners facing similar bullying tactics across the state. The Sarah Memorial Scholarship Fund partnered with legal aid societies to provide paralegal training for rural women, teaching property rights and HOA law to small farmers who couldn't afford expensive litigation when developers targeted their land for forced sales. Speaking engagements at county meetings and property rights conferences kept me busy sharing lessons learned from our fight, while the taste of meaningful work replaced the bitterness of loss with something approaching peace. Community transformation exceeded my wildest expectations as residents formed a voluntary neighborhood association focused on mutual aid rather than authoritarian control, organizing charity drives for local families and environmental projects that actually improved property values through cooperation instead of intimidation. The subdivision became a showcase for how neighbors can work together without heavy-handed regulations, attracting new residents who specifically sought communities with minimal HOA interference and maximum personal freedom. Former opponents became allies as people realized they'd been manipulated into fighting someone who'd only wanted to ranch in peace while contributing to community welfare through honest work and neighborly behavior. Practical education became part of my mission as I developed resources helping property owners research boundaries through county records, identify red flags for HOA corruption through financial audits, and understand legal protections available when facing bureaucratic abuse. Contact information for property rights organizations and step-by-step guides for challenging illegal regulations became freely available through a website dedicated to Sarah's memory, ensuring future victims wouldn't face these battles alone or unprepared. The key takeaway remained constant. Know your rights, document everything, and never let bullies convince you that might makes right. Epilogue. Updates paint a picture of justice and renewal as my ranch thrives with healthy cattle grazing freely across restored pastures, while Daphne Rodriguez volunteers her county clerk expertise helping other property owners navigate bureaucratic challenges. Sheriff Rex was elected county commissioner on a platform of protecting rural property rights, and the Willowbrook subdivision became a model community where voluntary cooperation replaced mandatory compliance with fake regulations. The smell of wildflowers on Sarah's grave mixed with fresh coffee from her favorite mug during my weekly visits, where I shared stories of people helped and battles won in her honor. The teaser for upcoming content hints at more justice porn tales, including an eminent domain abuse case where a small town fought back against corrupt officials trying to steal family farms for corporate development, building anticipation among viewers hungry for stories of ordinary people defeating systematic oppression through courage and legal knowledge. My final thoughts carried Sarah's wisdom forward. Bullies count on good people staying quiet, but sometimes you have to fight to protect what's right, and property rights are everyone's rights. Remember that the best revenge is always living well, and the sweetest victory comes from helping others avoid the battles you had to fight alone. The dual call to action closed with perfect engagement. If you've got an HOA nightmare story, drop it in the comments below and hit that subscribe button for more stories of regular folks fighting back against the system and winning.
Thanks for watching HOA Stories. If this episode made you laugh or shake your head at HOA madness, hit that like button and drop your opinion below. We post HOA Karen Chaos and Neighborhood Showdowns every week, so be sure to subscribe to catch the next unbelievable story.